Hello, I'm going to recite a poem entitled A Tuft of Flowers by Robert Frost and give some insight on it. But before I do that, I'd like to just make a few points about some of the terms that come up in the poem itself. Um, First of all, tuft. A tuft is a clump or a bunch of, let's say, hair or strings or thread or grass that has a common root. So a tuft of flowers stands apart from the rest of the field. And the second point is that we're going to be dealing with a mower, not a lawnmower or a tractor, but an individual, a man who is cutting the fields with an instrument called a scythe, which is a very long handled blade with two handle grips on it. And the blade was probably 3 feet long. And to sharpen that blade, he would use a whetting, Whetting, a whetting stone to whet the blade. And so, these are things that someone from the late 19th and early 20th century would be very familiar with on the farm. But today, we mention the word mower and we think of a lawnmower. So that's one of the reasons why I point that out. The second point is that the narrator of the poem, who is an individual in the story itself, he's talking about himself. The narrator mentions that he's in the field to toss the grass. Now, why? Because it has dew on it, and if he doesn't toss it and flip it over in the sun, it'll form mold, and then the hay would be useless to cattle or whatever use the person might want to put it to. So that's why he's there. He's tossing the grass. Now, there are two people in the poem. It's a narrative poem, which means that it's a story, narration, and as a narrator, who is as I said, he is one of the two people in the poem. And there is a kind of third person, too, in the form of a butterfly. And the butterfly is an agent or an instrument that kind of connects the two individuals. The theme of the poem is that all mankind is interdependent, that we all have some relation to one another, and we don't always know that. And that's the second sub-theme in it, that the narrator comes to an appreciation of this idea that when the poem begins, when he starts out, he doesn't feel this way at all. He thinks that everybody is independent. But in the course of the narration of events, something happens that makes him feel a kindred spirit with the other person. So those are the main points. It's a very beautiful poem. It's written in what is called rhyming couplets. That means every two lines rhyme together. And also an iambic pentameter, which I discussed in other videos, about each line has 5 beats with the accent on the second syllable, so on. And the most important reason to know this is that creates a kind of conversational tone, and that's what the narrator wants you to feel like. He's just talking to you about something that happened to him. So it happens to be my favorite poem, and this is the way it goes. I went to turn the grass after one who mowed it in the dew before the sun. The dew was gone that made his blade so keen before I came to view the leveled scene. I looked for him behind an aisle of trees. I listened for his whetstone on the breeze. But he had gone his way, the grass all mown, and I must be as he had been, alone. as all must be, I said within my heart, whether they work together or apart. But as I said it, swift there passed me by on noiseless wing a bewildered butterfly, seeking with memory grown dim or night some resting flower of yesterday's delight. And once I marked his flight go round and round as to where some flower lay withering on the ground. And then he flew as far as I could see, and then on tremulous wing came back to me. I thought of questions that have no reply, and would have turned to toss the grass to dry, but he turned first, and led my eye to look at a tall tuft of flowers beside a brook, a leaping tongue of bloom the side had spared, beside a reedy brook the side had bared. The mower in the dew had loved them thus, by leaving them to flourish, not for us, nor yet to turn one thought of ours to him, but from sheer morning gladness at the brim. The butterfly had and I had lit upon, nevertheless a message from the dawn, that made me hear the wakening birds around, and hear his long sigh whispering to the ground, and feel with him a spirit kindred to my own, that henceforth I worked no more alone, but glad with him I worked as with his aid, and weary sought at noon with him the shade, and dreaming as it were, held brotherly speech with one whose thought I hadn't hoped to reach. Men work together, I told him from the heart, whether they work together or apart. Very beautiful poem. Um, and as I said, in the course of the narration, the narrator, the person who was in the field after the mower, he comes to the realization that we're not all alone in our pursuits, that each of us, whether we know it or not, and most often we don't recognize it, that we all have some relationship to one another. So in this particular event, what happens is that the narrator comes across this tuft of flowers, and what does that mean? It means that he recognized that the mower had, he knew what the mower was feeling, even though he doesn't see the mower, the man. He doesn't see him or talk to him or anything, but he knows exactly what that man was like. So there's kind of like an unvoiced correspondence or relationship between the two. The other man doesn't even know that this narrator exists. All right, so very nice. What pleases me about this poem is the imagery. Before I came to view the leveled scene, in other words, the grass is all cut down and it's leveled. And then, the mower, when he is swinging the side, he is establishing a rhythm. It's a cadence, if he wants to do the job effectively. So listen to the way he says it. Beside a reedy brook, the side it bared. The tuft of flowers was beside a leaping tongue of bloom, the side it spared. Beside a reedy brook, the side it bared. Now that almost sounds like the man coming down with the blade, lifting it up, coming back down with it again, and very beautiful. And then even the imagery beside a reedy brook. There's so many little details in this poem that if you don't look closely, you will miss them. And that happens from the very first line, when he talks about the dew was gone that made his blade so keen before I came to view the leveled scene. So the mower had been there at early dawn, and here this narrator comes some time later, and You know, he sees this beauty all around him. And I love the way that the butterfly, he said, the butterfly and I nevertheless had lit upon a message from the dawn. But lit upon, it's almost like the butterfly is landing on a flower. You know, it lit upon the flower. And instead, he and the butterfly are united in their recognition of something, all right? We're lit upon a message from the dawn. And what was the message? That this mower had seen this beautiful tuft of flowers and spared it. Probably he'd probably never come back to it, but you know, it was a thing that he didn't have the heart to cut down because it was such a thing of beauty. And that's what I like about that. And at the end, I like the part about where he says that made me feel a spirit kindred to my own. We both felt the same way. And feel and glad with him. He says, glad with him I worked as with his aid. You know, it kind of like inspired him, gave him a gladness of heart, you know. I worked as with his aid. And then he says, in weary sought at noon with him the shade. That's nice too. And dreaming as it were her brotherly speech with one whose thought I hadn't hoped to reach. And then finally the theme, men work together. I told him from the heart, whether they work together or apart. So there's that communication again without words. And it's his spirit talking to his, quote, kindred spirit. So very short analysis here, but it's a poem beauty, and that's why it's my favorite. Okay, so that's all for today.